A nun hears a baby crying from the convent basement every night, but when she investigates, she uncovers a secret that will change her life forever. Sister Betty dedicated her life to the convent from a very young age. Raised in a humble family, she lost her parents early and found refuge in faith. Without siblings or close relatives, the convent became her home and her only certainty. She accepted her vocation without questioning, surrendering herself to discipline and obedience. Over time, she became one of the most devout and respected nuns. Her days were marked by prayers, work, and silence. Everything followed a constant rhythm, waking before dawn, taking care of the convent's tasks, praying and sleeping to repeat it all the next day. The routine was predictable, and in it Betty found comfort, but sometimes an inexplicable emptiness would take hold of her. She had never doubted her faith, but on some nights, when the convent sank into silence, she felt a strange weight on her chest. She didn't understand why, nor what she lacked. She only knew that, no matter how devout she was, something within her remained restless. That night, the convent was immersed in absolute silence. Betty lay down early as usual, covering herself with the thin blanket. Her room, the only one on the first floor, was close to the food storage since she was responsible for its organization. All the other dormitories were on the second floor, far from there. The wind outside whispered against the windows, and everything seemed to follow the same tranquility as always, but then she heard it. At first, she thought it was her imagination. A distant sound, faint, muffled, almost like a lament. She turned over in bed, trying to ignore it. Maybe it was just the wind passing through the old stone walls, or some animal venturing through the garden. But then it came again, a low sound, almost a sob. Betty held her breath. What was that? She thought, feeling a shiver run down her spine. Her heart raced. Her eyes searched the darkness as if they could see something beyond the blackness of the dormitory. But there was nothing there. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes, trying to push away that strange feeling. The next night, she heard it again. This time, she paid more attention. The sound was clearer, a cry, weak, distant, but a cry. And no matter how much she tried to find a logical explanation, she knew that was impossible. The convent was inhabited only by nuns, no children, no babies. She forced herself to believe it was just tiredness. But the next night came, and the crying did too, and for several more nights in a row. At first, she tried to ignore it. She prayed more, asking that her heart not be distracted by illusions. But the sound always returned, more distinct each time, always in the middle of the night, always echoing from the cold hallways leading to the basement, until she could no longer sleep. The mystery consumed her. Her faith told her to trust in the divine order of things, but her mind screamed that something was wrong. How could there be a baby hidden in the convent? Who would be hiding a child? And why? Then, that moonlit night, she made her decision. She slowly got up, feeling her feet touch the cold floor of the dormitory. She took the lantern by the bedside and lit the wick with trembling hands. She silently descended the hallways, hearing only the sound of her own steps echoing. With each step, her heart beat faster. The air grew colder as she approached the basement. When she reached the old wooden door, she took a deep breath. She placed her hand on the doorknob, hesitated for a moment, and then pushed. The scene before her made her heart stop. Sister Donna had always been a discreet presence in the convent. Reserved, silent, she carried out her tasks without drawing attention. She wasn't one for long conversations, nor did she easily show emotions. She always kept a little apart from the others, as if she carried an invisible burden that prevented her from fully embracing life in the cloister. Betty had never questioned this behavior. Some nuns were like that, simply more introverted. But now, here, in the dim light of the basement, everything made sense. Donna was sitting on the floor, holding a baby in her arms. The child was softly sobbing, his eyes heavy with sleep. Donna rocked him with a desperate tenderness, as if every moment with him was too precious to be lost. When she noticed Betty, she froze. "Betty," said Donna, her voice choked. The lantern almost slipped from Betty's hands. The shock prevented her from reacting. "Donna, what does this mean?" Betty said, her voice barely a whisper. Donna didn't try to hide it. Her eyes were misty, her face marked by exhaustion. She simply held the baby tighter. I can explain," Donna said, breathing heavily. Betty felt her heart pounding in her chest. How could this be possible? How had no one noticed? "Explain," Betty said, trying to stay calm. Donna closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and then began. "He's my nephew," Donna said, her voice almost breaking. "My sister's son." Betty's eyes widened. "But how? How is he here? How does no one know about this?" Betty said, feeling the world spin around her. Donna lowered her head, silent tears streaming down her face. "My sister lost her husband. She was left alone with the baby. She doesn't have an education, couldn't get a decent job. She works all day, and also at night," Donna said, her voice breaking. Betty felt a knot form in her throat. She couldn't afford a nanny. She couldn't leave the baby alone. "And I'm the only person she has left," Donna said, looking at Betty with a silent desperation. Betty felt the weight of that truth. "You bring him here every night," Betty said, finishing the thought. Donna nodded, holding the baby even tighter. "I had no choice. He was hungry, crying alone at home. My sister doesn't sleep, barely eats. She's exhausted. I did what I could," Donna said, the tears finally escaping. Betty closed her eyes for a moment, feeling her heart tighten. "You know the risk you're taking?" Betty said, trying to keep her voice steady. "The Mother Superior would never accept it. If she finds out, he'll be sent away, and I'll be expelled," Donna said, sobbing in a whisper. The weight of the situation hit Betty like a stone block. All of this was forbidden. Sister Donna had broken the most sacred rules of the convent. But how could she ignore Donna's desperation? How could she turn her back on that helpless baby? How did no one notice?" Betty said, feeling her mind spin. Donna laughed, but it was a bitter laugh. "I disappeared for a few hours. No one noticed. All the other rooms are on the second floor, too far to hear anything. The only one who could hear the crying was you, Betty," Donna said, her voice full of pain. "No one noticed the dark circles, the exhaustion, the fear." Betty felt like she was suffocating. While she spent her days praying, seeking a purpose, Donna fought alone against an unbearable burden. The flame of the lantern flickered between them. The baby, now calmer, nestled against Donna's chest. Betty took a deep breath, feeling the crushing weight of the decision she had just made. She looked at Sister Donna, whose eyes were still full of tears, reflecting the fear and uncertainty of someone standing on the edge of a cliff. "I won't tell anyone," Betty said, keeping her gaze steady on her sister. Donna blinked, surprised. Her breath was shallow, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her lips trembled before any word came out. "Thank you," Donna said, her voice faltering. "Thank you, Betty. You can't imagine what this means to me." Betty lowered her gaze for a moment, feeling the tight knot in her throat. Donna's gratitude cut like a knife, because this wasn't a favor, this wasn't an act of generosity. It was simply the right thing to do. "You don't have to thank me," Betty said, shaking her head. I just need to think." She took a step back, feeling the cold of the basement engulf her skin. The baby, now asleep in Donna's arms, breathed softly, unaware of the storm of emotions happening around him. Without saying another word, Betty turned and left the basement. Silence returned to reign within those cold walls, but inside Betty, a storm had begun. In the days that followed, Betty felt trapped inside her own heart. During the prayers, her mind wandered. While washing clothes at the stone sink, her breath grew heavy. While preparing herbs in the kitchen, her fingers hesitated. Doubt gnawed at her soul, transforming her once unshakable faith into a silent battlefield. The voice of the Mother Superior echoed in her mind, rigid and inflexible. The rules are sacred. They cannot be broken. But inside her chest, something screamed louder. Donna wasn't a sinner. She wasn't a rebel. She was simply a sister, a woman trying to save the only piece of family she had left. Would it be wrong to help her? Would it be a sin to offer love to someone in need? In the convent, everything was silence and obedience, but faith shouldn't be just that. Faith should be compassion. It should be sacrifice for the other. Each night that passed, Betty became more and more restless. The baby's cry was no longer a mystery, it was a cry for help. And every time it echoed through the convent's hallways, Betty felt more suffocated. Until one cold dawn, she knew she could no longer ignore what her heart was telling her. She made her decision. She got up, lit her lantern, and went down to the basement again. The cold there seemed even more intense than before. The dampness made the air dense and heavy, and in the midst of the dim light, Donna was there. Kneeling on a small blanket on the stone floor, she rocked the baby in her arms, murmuring soft words, like a prayer. Betty hesitated for a moment at the doorframe. The light of the lantern flickered. Donna saw her and widened her eyes, surprised. "Betty, what are you doing here?" Donna said, her voice full of concern. Betty walked slowly toward her without responding immediately. She sat down beside her and looked at the child, now calmer, asleep in Donna's arms. For a long moment neither spoke. Only silence filled the space between them. Then Betty took a deep breath. "I want to help," Betty said, looking directly at Donna. Donna blinked, confused. "What?" Donna said, almost voiceless. "We can't go on like this. You can't carry this burden alone. I want to help. But not just with the baby. We need to do something for your sister too. She can't live like this. It's not good for her, nor for the child," Betty said firmly. Donna opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her eyes filled with tears. I don't know what to say," Donna said, her voice cracking. "Then just tell me his name," Betty said, looking at the baby. Donna smiled through her tears. "His name is Christopher," Donna said, her voice soft. Betty felt something different inside her upon hearing the name. Now, the baby was no longer just a shadow hidden in the convent. He was Christopher, a little being with a name, a story, with an uncertain future full of struggles. Betty raised one hand and hesitantly touched the child's face. Christopher sighed in his sleep, his tiny fingers curling slightly. Donna couldn't contain her tears, but this time it wasn't a cry of fear, it was a cry of relief. "I thought I was alone in this," Donna said softly. "You're not anymore," Betty said firmly. The two stayed there, side by side, for a long time. And that night, for the first time, Donna told the whole truth. The story Donna had told earlier about her sister was just part of it. Now, Betty knew the details that made everything even more painful. "My sister's name is Laura," Donna said, her voice full of emotion. "She never had anything in life. Since childhood, our family struggled to get food. My father drank. My mother did what she could, and Laura, she was always the strongest of us." Betty listened silently, absorbing every word. She dropped out of school early to work. She washed clothes, cleaned houses, did what she could. All so I could have something to eat. And when she got older, she got married. She thought she would finally have a better life. But then her husband got sick and died before he could see the child born, Donna said, squeezing her eyes shut to hold back the tears. "And since then, she's been fighting alone," Betty whispered. "Yes," Donna said. "She sleeps 2-3 hours a night, She doesn't eat right. What she earns barely covers the rent of a small room. And still, she never complains. She never said she regretted having Christopher. On the contrary, she always says that he's the only reason she's still standing. Betty felt a pang in her chest. "She's strong," Betty said, impressed. "Stronger than anyone I've ever known," Donna said, smiling faintly. The two stayed silent for a moment, until Betty broke the silence. "We have to help her," Betty said, determined. Donna nodded. "But how?" Donna said. Betty sighed, thinking. In the following days, the two nuns spent hours trying to find a solution. "I could take some food from the kitchen," Betty said, as she helped Donna stretch the convent sheets. "But how would you do that without being noticed?" Donna said, worried. "I work in the stockroom. I know the times when no one's around," Betty said. Donna hesitated. "Wouldn't that be stealing?" Donna said, fearing the answer. "No," Betty said firmly. "It would be sharing." And so they began. Each night, Betty would set aside small portions of bread, cheese, fruits, and leave them for Donna. Not much, to avoid suspicion, but enough so her sister could eat a little better. They also managed to get some clothes for Christopher. The Mother Superior receives donations from women in the community, Betty said, as she folded a little coat. "I can find a way to get some pieces for him." Donna looked at Betty with gratitude. "I never thought you could do something like this," Donna said. "Neither did I," Betty said, smiling slightly. But despite the small efforts, they knew it wouldn't be enough. The food helped, the clothes helped, but Laura's life remained the same. And then, one night, sitting in the basement as always, Betty looked at Donna and said, "This isn't enough yet." Donna sighed. "I know," Donna said, "but what else can we do?" Betty stayed silent, staring at the flickering lantern flame. She knew they needed something bigger, something that would truly change Laura's life and secure a future for Christopher. The next night, Betty entered the basement with determined steps. Donna was there, as always, rocking Christopher against her chest. The baby slept peacefully, his little face serene. When Donna noticed Betty's presence, she raised her eyes and immediately knew something had changed. "You have a plan," Donna said, watching her closely. Betty nodded, sitting beside her. "Yes," Betty said, taking a deep breath. "I know someone who can help." Donna frowned, visibly cautious. "Who?" Donna said, keeping her voice low. "Dom Jeffrey," Betty said. Donna blinked, surprised. "The administrator of the church?" Donna said, uncertain. "Betty, are you sure? What if he tells the Mother Superior?" "He won't tell," Betty said with conviction. "I've known Dom Jeffrey since before I entered the convent. He's a just, kind man. If there's anyone who can help us, it's him." Donna stayed silent for a moment. "But what if I'm wrong?" Donna said, biting her lower lip. "What if he doesn't understand? What if he reports us?" Betty took Donna's hand firmly. "Trust me," Betty said, looking directly into her eyes. Donna hesitated for a few seconds, then sighed and nodded. "I trust you," Donna said softly. Betty squeezed her hand affectionately, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. "Tomorrow, I'll speak with him after Mass," Betty said. The next morning, the church Mass was crowded. Betty kept her composure throughout the ceremony, but her heart raced as the moment drew near. When the final prayer was said and the faithful began to leave, she approached Dom Jeffrey, who was still organizing a few items on the altar. "Dom Jeffrey, may I speak with you?" Betty said, trying to sound serene. The man, with a calm demeanor and wise eyes, smiled at her. "Of course, Sister Betty. What is it about?" Dom Jeffrey said, closing a thick book and looking at her curiously. "It's something important. Could we speak privately?" Betty said, keeping her voice low. Dom Jeffrey noticed the seriousness in her gaze and nodded. "Come with me." Dom Jeffrey said, leading her through a narrow corridor to a small room at the back of the church. When the doors closed, Betty took a deep breath and began to speak. She told him everything, from the crying in the middle of the night to the truth about Christopher. She spoke about Donna's struggle, about Laura's hard life, about the fear that everything could collapse at any moment. Dom Jeffrey remained silent, listening attentively. When Betty finished, her heart was pounding in her chest. He stayed silent for a few seconds, analyzing every word spoken. Then he smiled faintly. "Of course I'll help," Dom Jeffrey said, with a firm kindness in his voice. Betty felt a deep sense of relief. "We need to find a better job for Laura," Betty said, eager. "I know some people who can help her. I want you, Donna, and Laura to come here tomorrow evening," Dom Jeffrey said, crossing his hands over the table. Betty felt the tears burn in her eyes. "Thank you, Dom Jeffrey. You don't know what this means," Betty said, sincerely moved. "Doing good will never be a mistake, Sister Betty," Dom Jeffrey said, smiling. Betty nodded, feeling her heart lighten. That night at the convent, Betty told Donna everything. Donna covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes full of emotion. "He really agreed to help us?" Donna said, incredulous. "Yes," Betty said, smiling. "He wants you and Laura to be at the church tomorrow evening." Donna nodded several times, trying to process the information. I need to tell her," Donna said, already eager to talk to her sister. "Do that. Tomorrow will be a new beginning for her," Betty said. Donna smiled, and for the first time since all this began, she seemed truly hopeful. The next day, the sun began to set as Betty and Donna arrived at the church. The path there was silent, not from a lack of words, but because both knew the weight of that moment. For Donna, it meant much more than just a solution for her sister. It meant hope. In the church's side yard, a woman was waiting. Betty recognized her before Donna spoke. There was something in her eyes that reminded her of Donna, but at the same time carried a different weariness, a mark of the hard life she had lived. Laura didn't seem much older than Donna, but the lines of her face told a long and difficult story. Her skin was marked by hard work, and the deep dark circles under her eyes showed the sleepless nights. When Donna saw her, she let out a tremulous sigh and squeezed Betty's hand before stepping forward. "Laura!" Donna said, running to embrace her sister. Laura smiled, but her face quickly contorted in emotion as she felt the warmth of her sister's embrace. "Donna," Laura said, her voice choked. "Did you really do it?" Donna nodded, still holding her tightly. "Yes, Betty brought us here. We're going to talk to Dom Jeffrey. He wants to help us," Donna said, pulling back just to hold her sister's hands. It was then that Laura's eyes met Betty's. Betty took a step forward, feeling the depth of that look. There was gratitude there, but also a silent fear, a fear of believing that something good might finally happen. "You must be Laura," Betty said with a gentle smile. Laura hesitated for a moment before nodding. "Yes, and your sister Betty," Laura said, her voice trembling slightly. "Donna told me about you, about everything you've done for us." "I've done nothing but what had to be done," Betty said sincerely. Laura took a deep breath and lowered her gaze for a moment. "You don't understand," Laura said, clutching the fabric of her shawl. "I'm used to fighting alone. No one ever cared. I've always been told to just accept my fate, that nothing would change. But then Donna appeared. And now you." Betty felt her heart tighten. "You're not alone anymore, Laura," Betty said softly. Laura blinked quickly, fighting back tears. "Let's go in," Donna said, lightly touching her sister's arm. And together they walked through the large wooden doors of the church. Dom Jeffrey was already waiting for them in a simple room at the back of the church. There were few things there, just an old wooden table, some chairs, and a large cross hanging on the wall. When Betty entered, he smiled. Sister Betty, Dom Jeffrey said, standing up. Dom Jeffrey, this is Donna and her sister Laura, Betty said, making the introductions. Dom Jeffrey's gaze softened as it landed on Laura. It's a pleasure to meet you, my daughter, Dom Jeffrey said kindly. Laura lowered her head as if she wasn't used to receiving such kind words. Thank you for having us, Father, Laura said, her voice almost a whisper. Please sit down, Dom Jeffrey said, indicating the chairs. When everyone was seated, Betty took a deep breath. Dom Jeffrey, I know you've heard part of the story, but I think Laura needs to tell it in her own words, Betty said, looking at the young woman. Laura swallowed hard. Her fingers trembled lightly around the fabric of her shawl. You don't have to be afraid, Donna said, holding her hand. Laura closed her eyes for a moment before finally beginning to speak. My life has never been easy, Laura said, her voice filled with exhaustion. Since I was little, I learned that no one helps us without expecting something in return. My parents could barely sustain the house, and Donna was always my light, the only good thing I had. Donna lowered her eyes, emotional. When I lost my husband, I thought nothing could get worse. But then came the reality. Working all day, coming home exhausted, with nothing to eat, watching my son cry from hunger and not being able to do anything. That's what destroys me every day, Laura said, her voice breaking. Dom Jeffrey listened silently, not interrupting. I've thought about giving up so many times. But then, when Donna started bringing Christopher at night, it was the only thing that allowed me to keep going. Knowing he was safe, that someone was taking care of him. I don't know what would have happened without her, Laura said, tears streaming down her face. Dom Jeffrey took a deep breath, and his eyes seemed to shine with compassion. You've been very strong, my daughter, Dom Jeffrey said, his voice full of tenderness. Laura laughed softly, but it was a sad laugh. I don't know if I'm strong. I just didn't have a choice, Laura said. Dom Jeffrey stood up and walked over to the table, picking up a small piece of paper. I know a woman who manages the parish library. She needs an assistant. The pay is modest, but it's enough for you to sustain yourself and stay with your child at night, Dom Jeffrey said. Laura's eyes widened. What? Laura said, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. It's a simple job. Just keep the space organized. You don't need education, just dedication. And from what I see, you have that in abundance, Dom Jeffrey said. Laura put her hands to her mouth, trying to hold back the tears. This means that I'll be able to take care of my child? Laura said, her voice breaking. Yes, Dom Jeffrey said, smiling. The tears came before she could stop them. Donna hugged her tightly, and Betty felt her eyes water. Thank you, Laura said through sobs. Dom Jeffrey smiled and looked at Betty. You've done something good, Sister Betty, Dom Jeffrey said. I just followed what my heart told me was right, Betty said sincerely. In the following days, everything changed. Laura got the job and was finally able to care for Christopher at night. Donna no longer had to hide in the convent. The fear was replaced with hope. And that last night, when Betty lay in her bed and heard the absolute silence of the convent, she realized that something inside her had changed forever. Faith wasn't just about blindly following rules. It wasn't just about praying and accepting. True faith was doing good, even when it meant challenging everything they had taught her. And without anyone else knowing, 2 nuns changed the fate of a child. Where there had once been despair, now there was love. And this would be the strongest prayer Betty would carry for the rest of her life. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.